started your love for video games? Let's start kind of like right towards the beginning and we can go from there.
Oh man, I've been playing games forever. When I was a little kid, I played Super Mario Bros. I think was the first game that I ever played on my parents' Nintendo Entertainment System, and I grew up with Pokemon and with all sorts of like great Nintendo games, and I loved that. When I was playing games, I felt like it wasn't so much that they were telling me a story; it was that I got to be part of a story. I got to participate in something that felt bigger than me. And as a kid, like what is more powerful than that? Um, so as I got older, I kept that love and I started to really seek out games that were trying to to tell stories in different ways and to bring players into them in different ways. And I realized at some point I was like, wow, like there's so many different ways to go about this, and there's so many designers out there that are trying like radically different things. And while there's every art form, there's a lot of experimentation and people that try to push the limits. And this one, it felt like people hadn't even developed the language yet. It was still in its infancy, and that was exciting to me. So I was like, oh, if I can learn how to do this stuff, then maybe I could be a pioneer too.
Hmm. What were your first ideas? Like when you first came up with that, were you just like, hey, this is interesting to me because I have a chance to pave my own way? Or did you have something in mind already that you're like, this is an issue that I'd like to correct, right off the bat?
Honestly, at the beginning, it was just sheer interest in the space, and I had all sorts of game ideas, and most of them were really bad. Let's say I had I mean, like, in high school, like, it's a really dumb juvenile ones. I remember making a Frogger game where you're like poop on the bathroom floor, like dodging. It was awful, 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 awful stuff. I'm not proud of it.
That sounds like a high school type of game.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. I was like,
That's where
well,
your
no
head's
one's
at.
made this type of game before. I can be a pioneer. Yeah, but, as I started to dive into this stuff more, the I think the like real turning point for me was when I discovered Genova Chen's games. Genova Chen's a game designer who he came out of USC, which is where I went to college to study game design. And back when I was in high school, Flash was still a pretty big thing, and a lot of people were making games in Flash, and you would find all sorts of like weird and wild things there. This was before there was like a healthier independent games market, so you would typically go online and just kind of see what you could find.
There were
Um,
some weird games out there, man.
Weird
I
stuff.
remember
Yeah.
some really weird ones coming across in like high school and middle school.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And yeah, Genova's was this game called Flow, and it was this flash game where you're playing as this microscopic organism, and you were essentially like you were growing as you ate things. I'm not describing this a very good way, but the thing that was special about Flow was it was incredibly atmospheric. It was very peaceful. It was a game that was like clearly not trying to be a power fantasy. It was trying to elicit a different type of emotion. And it was very clear, not just from playing it, but from the thesis paper that Genova had attached to it, because this was his thesis project in college. So I could read it and I could see exactly what he was trying to explore. He was really inspired by this principle in psychology, flow theory, which is, can you get people in a state where their skill set matches the challenge at all times? And in flow, you could essentially like choose how to engage with
Hmm.
how difficult you wanted the experience to be. So it's really cool to see somebody approach games from a way more like academic lens, and also, he wasn't making power fantasies. He wasn't making games about poop sliding on the floor. He was making something that was quite a bit more meaningful. And after I saw that, I started to think about like, okay, well, what could I do that's outside of the norm too?
Is that what made you want to go to USC in the first place?
It was what put it on the map for me, for
Okay.
sure. When I was in high school, I took all sorts of computer classes and design classes, and spent a summer at Carnegie Mellon learning just more about game development. Um, but yeah, USC was they were like by far the most established games program.
Hmm.
At the time, there weren't that many, and when I discovered that they were promoting and encouraging people to design games like this that were really outside of the norm, that got me very excited. So when I applied to college, I really only applied to five schools. There were the five schools at the time that were not trade schools that had game design programs. Because I wanted like a broader college experience too. And USC was my top choice. And I'm so glad that I was able to get in there.
It's not easy. I mean, you know, and I think a lot of people know how good a game design school it is. Did you have to have an idea for a project at that point? Did you just kind of did they go based off of potential? How did that work?
I mean, I couldn't really tell you exactly what they saw in me and why I got it, but um,
You didn't have
I
to
remember
submit a
the app.
game, did you?
You didn't have to submit a game, but there were various kind of creative work samples that were part of the application. I have no idea what it's like today, but back then at least, I remember writing up like a spec for a game that I would like to make. It was also like better than the high school ideas, but still a way away from the types of games that I ended up making. Um, and I remember I also included, I had been learning a lot about like 3D modeling at the time, so I included some 3D models that I had created to show them that I had a understanding at least of some of the fundamentals of the technology too.
I think about it all the time though, like what did Syracuse see in me? What could they have possibly seen? Because I think back to like those times and like I had nothing. Like I didn't have that much experience. Certainly didn't have a good tape. Thankfully, you didn't have to submit any type of your work. I don't know. I guess we got lucky in some ways, and then or they're very good at talent development. That might be it too, right?
Who knows? Who knows? But it's all about just getting over that line, and then
Right.
you know, then it opens the doors for you, and you can figure out how you want to walk through.
Well, that led to your first game, right? Where cards fall. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I know it was chosen by Apple to jumpstart Apple Arcade. Your sister was very quick to point out that she is the only member of the Rosenthal family that's ever finished that
That is
game.
true.
Uh, how did the creation process go for that?
Yeah, it was, I mean, honestly, like a decade-long story. So I started prototyping games around building houses of cards my freshman year at USC. And where that came from was, USC really preached starting with like an emotional core. Like what type of feeling do you want your game to elicit before you start to figure out like I'm going to make a sports game or I'm going to make
Hmm.
a auto chess game or something like that. Um, so with Where Cards Fall, I was thinking a lot about a Radiohead song that I loved, the song House of Cards, and that song is I thought it was a really like beautiful just expression of letting something fall apart in your life and finding a way to build something new out of it. And I was thinking about like how this is such an age-old idiom. People use that house of cards metaphor for so many different things. Um, but it's also like the visualization of it is it's a bunch of game pieces, right? Like it's a bunch of cards that are stacked together and fall apart. And that could be a really interesting way to express life, in a way that makes sense as a video game. Um, I really wanted Where Cards Fall at the beginning to be a systemic game. What I mean by that is a lot of games focus on how different systems interlock and intersect. If you think about a game like Civilization, it's a lot about building a civilization from the ground up, and thinking about the economy, thinking about territory and things like that. The Sims, does a lot of like people management there, and I was trying to figure out how to make this game with cards do that, but I was a beginning game designer and I couldn't figure it out. But I was also working an internship at Disney while I was in college, and I worked on a game there called Where's My Water, which was a puzzle game on iPhone. And I learned a lot about puzzle design. And what I found was that like okay, I'm pretty confident that I can make this game as a puzzle game, and some other members of my team and also are interested in the idea and showed me some ways that we could do it. So it took like the 4 years at USC to and working with a great team of students that were helping to kind of find what its core really was going to be, and it ended up being this coming of age story that was told through solving these little individual puzzles of life and having like the euphoria of remembering something lead you into the next. We came out of USC with that structure, with that idea, with a game that was compelling, but dramatically unfinished and had a long way to go. Um, so I went and I worked in the games industry for several years, and I kept this one alive on the side. And I looked for funding for it for a good while, struggled for a good while to find funding, and eventually was able to. And it was a small amount of money at the beginning, but it was enough to start a company and get this thing off the ground. All the Apple stuff came much later, but I
Right.
was glad that I kept going with that project.
Yeah. What did you learn from that experience? It must have been so eye opening in so many different ways.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much. I think when I think back to where Cardsville really started to come together in my final year at USC. USC kind of throws you into the deep end in a good way, where you get a chance to lead a team during your senior year, and I got to work with all these really talented students, uh, and and struggle to figure out what we were making, and work with all these amazing different disciplines that saw the game from a different light. An engineer is
Hmm.
going to come in with a different perspective than an artist, um,
Is this a
and I thought
team
that was
of
really fun.
underclassmen that you get to work with?
It
Is
was a
that how they set it
mixture. It
up,
was
or
undergrads and grad students,
interesting?
yeah, kind of mixed together, and we were all just trying to turn this game into something. And I really loved how intensely collaborative it felt. And every game development project that I've ever been part of since then has felt intensely collaborative. I think this is one of the most collaborative art forms that you can imagine. I think there's something to be said for clear direction and for vision holders and such, but at the same time, like everyone is bringing in their own sensibilities and uh, and are able to shape the project in their own way. It's one of the reasons I named my company the Game Band is because I think music has this in common, where you have a lot of people that are playing different instruments, that bringing a different part of the sound together, but at the end of the day, you're creating one cohesive sound, and people think of it as one unit, one band.
And you've kind of continued that, I guess, throughout your entire experience. When you formed the game band, did you have people in mind that you wanted? Did you meet people that way? How did that whole experience come about?
Yeah, the first people that joined the company were former students that I worked with at USC, and I was really grateful that they continued to, be passionate enough about the project and liked working with me enough to want to do this full time. But then some of the other early in people came from companies that I worked at.
Hmm.
So Corey, who's our 3D artist at the game band, he and I worked together on a game called What Remains of Edith Finch at a company called Giant Sparrow. And when that project wrapped, he came and joined me at the company. He's been here ever since. There's other people at Giant Sparrow that later joined the game band too. Um, Friends of mine from college that eventually wanted to come on board as well, and then I met all sorts of great people throughout my time in the industry that I was able to bring on. And then, of course, at some point, we started to actually do like a more formal hiring process and open the doors to candidates from all over.
All right, so I'm going to give you a few more accolades here, like we talked about. You were named Forbes 30 under 30 in late 2019, which I'm sure was such a cool personal honor and just a verification of what you'd been able to do and how much of a visionary you are in the industry. But then again, when you have the game band and you have a company, doesn't that give some legitimacy at the same time? And does that open up some doors for you guys?
Yeah, it was an amazing honor, and certainly not something that I ever expected. I think like the thing that has it's helped a lot in two very distinct ways. One was that I got to meet a lot of other really interesting people with fascinating businesses that are both in and outside of the games industry, and I was really grateful to get on that list just to be exposed to all of that, and have made some great friends through there as well. The other part is those types of awards and accolades, they certainly matter, especially when you go out to pitch what you're making and to raise money or to get people to fund your ideas. That stuff I think is very helpful there too. Um, at the end of the day, like the greatest reward for us is still always the response from our players. The industry accolades are amazing, of course, and It's wonderful to get good reviews and things like that. But what we really love seeing is when people write us that play the games and say like, "Hey, this was what the game meant to me," or um, by creating artwork around the game or music, or if it inspired them and to do something in their own life that was outside of just playing the game, then that's the biggest reward of all.
Let's jump into your latest venture because we kind of buried the lead. This is what you guys are up to right now. And we can talk more about running a company a little bit later. We'll definitely dive into that, but that's creative, obviously different in its own way. But your latest venture is Blaseball, which has really taken off. Now it's the main focus. To someone who has never heard of it, not in the gaming space, give us a description. I know it's not an easy task, but do your best.
I've been asked this so many times now, and I still struggle. Blaseball it's an absurdist horror fantasy baseball game. So this is a game that allows you to be a fan of a fake baseball team that plays simulated baseball games, and you bet on the games with fake money, and you cash in your earnings with all the other fans to vote to make changes to the league. So you can vote to change the rules, you can vote to change the story, and as everybody bands together and starts to organize to change things, you start to realize that there's a lot more sinister things happening beneath the surface here. So the baseball, in some ways, is a front for this much weirder and funnier kind of horror narrative. It's kind of simmering beneath the surface of it.
But how exactly does it like what are you doing if you're playing the game, so to speak? I know you're not that's the thing, you're not really playing, right? It's very different than picking up a controller on an Xbox or a PlayStation, like going to work as the Broncos in Madden. What's the intrigue?
Yeah, it's certainly not like an MLB The Show type of experience. So what you're actually doing on a moment-to-moment basis is you're betting on the games with that fake currency, and then you're the loop. So games are we always talk about games in forms of loops. Like what's the thing that you're constantly doing over and over again that changes a little bit. And with baseball, it's you're betting, you're using your rewards to get upgrades and votes, and then you're voting to change things. But that's not really where the appeal lies. Where the appeal is the community side to the game. So because there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people playing this game at once, no individual person can enact dramatic change. You have to organize with the other people that are playing the game to get what you want. So if you are a fan of the Baltimore Crabs, as I am, one of our baseball teams, and you want to help them win a championship, well, your votes are just your votes. You're going to need to start a social media campaign or so, or talk to the other fans to get enough support to get what you want actually done. And that's what we see. Our fans have organized around the game. We have this Discord server where they talk to each other and commune and watch the games together. A lot of it has happened on Twitter and social media. So it becomes this more like kind of mass community event, and the game is sort of the entry point into all of that.
You talk about Discord, which obviously has been very important for the gaming industry as itself. You guys are getting ready as we record this to relaunch a new season, kind of a reboot as opposed to maybe an evolution, is what I've kind of heard from you and others. Is there any interest in taking that in house and making your own kind of Discord server and having everything be like a one stop shop in some ways?
Yeah, we're certainly bringing some aspects of the communal experience into the core, but in a way that is way more specific to what this type of game actually is. The advantage of doing something like Discord at the beginning is it's already got a user base, and it's easy to get people to like just jump into and check it out. Well, to an extent, and it's we don't have to build it. It's a thing that already exists, but and what we found was that we got a lot of people to sign up for the game, and only a small portion of them joined our Discord. But our Discord was where the community kind of lived, and it was where the people became super fans. We're like, okay, like we should take that spirit and bring that into the game. But if we went and built Discord and just attached it to the game, that's way out of scope for what we're doing, and honestly not great because there's some the way the Discord is designed isn't really meant to be like a companion to games like this. So
Mm,
we went,
yeah.
okay, like what's the better version of that for Blaseball? What aspects of it do we really like that we would want to bring into this experience and get people interacting with each other in a way that is more tied towards the game.
Where did it come from? The whole idea. This is something that I've never even thought you would see, for it to be such a non-traditional type format and for you to be playing video games almost but not playing video games. How in the world did you guys come up with this idea?
Yeah, so it came from a few different places. During the pandemic, and the game was made like early in the pandemic, and we were all isolated, all just sitting at home. Uh, and one of the main like inspirations for me with the game band was has been trying to broaden the audience for games. But if we go back to high school real quickly, like at that point where I was playing Flow and all of that, most of my friends are already starting to either are were not interested in games or like dropping them. And yeah, I know Hannah is the only person that's beaten Where Cards Fall in the Family, but I mean, it shows like most people in my family don't really like or play video games too. So, I've
Right.
always been like the evangelist, trying to get more people into the fold. And
The
when
cult of games.
was exactly
Yeah.
and during the pandemic, most of my friends from college that I have a really close group of friends from college. None of them really play video games, but they wanted to play these like browser-based versions of board games and card games, like over Zoom. I thought that was really interesting because they were down to play something that was A, familiar to them, and B, on a web browser, so we didn't have to think about like, oh, do you have a Nintendo Switch or are you on Steam or any of that. It's just, yeah, we could just open up a browser tab and join it. But it was also kind of a pain to like organize all those Zoom calls. So I was like, okay, is there a way that we can do this at scale where we have a game that's constantly running, where a mass amount of people could all jump in and join in and play and bring people together? And that was the design challenge. So the first thing that I pitched the team was, what if we made a horse racing game where you're betting on these simulated horse races and getting really invested in the outcomes, and a mass amount of people can kind of steer the direction. So it was like the fundamentals of Blaseball, but not with a theme. And Joel, who's our lead game designer, who I've been making games with for a really long time, we met at USC. He was like, "Well, that's cool, Sam. The mechanics are interesting, but horse racing. Like none of us are into horse racing. Like what
Yeah,
can we do
sure.
better than that?" Joel and I are big Dodgers fans. We spent a lot of time in LA going to Dodger games together. I remember there was a playoff game where the Dodgers started to lose, and we started to riff and be like, "What if we're already down? Like let's just mess around. Like what would make this more interesting for us? Well, what if the players were carrying jugs of water on their heads, or what if like the rules were different?" And we just started to riff, and we went back to that like ludicrous conversation. We're like, okay, well, maybe there's actually something there. Like maybe that's actually a fun element to bring into the video game.
And so you came up with, I mean, the ideas are endless. It's remarkable to me that you guys are able to even brainstorm something like a player being incinerated in mid game. You had a secret base, right? That players could like hide out on, and then they reappear later in the game. And it's not like if the Yankees are playing the Red Sox and the Yankees score 2 runs on a single, you can't take that away. They're going to have at least two at the end of the game. That's not how baseball works.
Not
You have
so.
unruns, so the runs can come off the board. I mean, did it like just start in terms of your brainstorm and then just go off the rails?
Yeah, I will credit Stephen Bell, he's a narrative game designer here at the company, also someone I've worked with for a long time. He was the one that brought a lot of the wildness and the weirdness into Voiceball at the beginning. So when Joel and I got a version of the game, very like rudimentary version of the game up and running so that we could test it. We always like play test a lot of whenever we have an idea, we have to prove that it's going to be fun. So we bring in some outsiders and such and start to try it out with them. And we had Steven trying the game out really early, and his imagination just went wild. He was like, "Well, what if can there be something like the Naked Gun where like the umpires are assassins and they can kill players?" And we were like, "Okay, that wasn't where we were naturally going, but yeah, why not?" And we just kind of kept saying yes to like all of these wild ideas and finding room for them in the game, and that led to focusing the tone and the theme a lot more on this kind of absurd horror element. You know, a lot of it's just also the reflection of like the madness of that we were all feeling in the pandemic too, just
Sure, of
the state of the
course.
world at the time. Um, but yeah, you know, there's so much that you can do with iterating and tweaking a game that is like very commonly understood. It's one of my very favorite things about sports is, yeah, they're like the longest game design iterations. You get to see like every year there's like one or two rule changes and they're hotly contested, and you can see how they affect things. Baseball is just speeding that up to a ridiculous speed and introducing ones that would never ever fly. And it's fun. You get to see how they work for a week, and then we take them away and try something else.
Right, we didn't even mention that the season is only a week long,
That's right.
which
A
is
new champion every single week.
and it's so different too. You're right. You can put that in and then just see how it works, and then the next week maybe tweak it a little bit. And you've got, well, you guys have obviously a lot of players and a lot of followers at this point, and a lot of people from all different backgrounds. But you have some really tech savvy fans as well, I would imagine, that are in this space. So how do you make sure, and I know this happened kind of towards the beginning, right? How do you make sure that they don't alter the game in some way that is completely different than what you, as the company that owns it, that runs it, that is changing it and is in control of it, that you want?
We we ran into some problems early on. I think what you might be alluding to, where we had this mechanic in the game where you could get peanuts, and we had this whole like mystery that was planned out with what the peanuts actually do. And some fans figured out in like hour three of us introducing this that if they changed something, we had left some of our API endpoints open, and they touched them and found a way to give themselves infinite peanuts, and that screwed up everything. So I think we, in the moment, kind of found a philosophy to Blaseball, which is that the bugs are part of the story. So the game was crashing. We weren't able to keep it up. So our solution was to throw a massive peanut on the website and yell at the players. And that massive peanut became the antagonist naturally of our first storyline of Blaseball. We've had other elements of this, not necessarily driven by the fans, but our own technical mishap. There was a grand slam that resulted in a game going back in time, and that was something that we could have just like paused it and tried to rejigger things, but the fans named it the Grand Unslam, and we just made that part of the story. Um, so we just run with these things, and we are like we are buttoning things up a little bit more as we gear towards our next release, so that you know we can at the very least like get the ideas that we have off the ground and to put them in, but we are leaving plenty of room. We're being, I should say, more specific about where we want the fan involvement to be, um, for both the health and sanity of our team and for the story to continue in a way that is a little bit more structured.
Has the response, that this overwhelmingly positive response, and all different people from around the world so invested in these fake teams, Baltimore Crabs, Seattle Garages, which should be a name for a team in Seattle, like screw the Mariners, the Garages, that kicks way more ass, I think. Are you shocked at all by the response, and that so many people are so interested and love your game so much?
Definitely. This was a side project for us. It was an experiment. We were having a great time with it internally, but whenever you release a game, it's terrifying. Like the night before we launched Blaseball, I was like, yeah, maybe we should just scrap this whole thing because this is kind of ridiculous, and people might think it's so stupid and might destroy any credibility that we gain from where cards fall.
Sure,
Um,
yeah.
you know, we never expected it to take off the way that it did. I think we first got a taste for it when we started the fan art came in. We're like, whoa, people are making fan art out of these like silly player names, and then that exploded, and then suddenly there was a band around the Seattle garages that was making music, and people were writing stories, and it was completely overwhelming, so far beyond anything that we ever could have expected for this game.
How when you look at the response, and people love it so much the way that it is, but obviously you have to evolve the game. You have to make sure that it stays relevant. How do you do that in its next iteration and make sure that you don't have a change in there that people are really upset about and might even cause some negative backlash?
Yeah. Um, so for the next version of the game, there's a number of we have a number of goals for it. So first off, like it's going to be on mobile for the first time. We
That's
only
cool.
have been on web browsers before. Yeah. So it's launching on iOS and Android, and the web is still going to be there too. So you can play it however you'd like. It's a big deal for us for a lot of reasons. One is people are out and about more today, and we want to give them a way to actually take the game with them and interface with it in a way that's a little less all-consuming. When you're on a mobile device, you can get notifications about how your team is doing and how your bets paid off and things like that, which is a
Yep.
nice, more passive way of playing the game than what the web version demanded before. Another thing that we found was that because this game is live, a lot of fans would jump in, say like week 3 or 4, and be like, "Well, what happened?" And it was challenging for them to catch up. They would have to go on YouTube and find fan-made videos or ask people in the Discord and such. So we are playing with a lot of different ways to solve that problem and to make it feel like when you jump in to Blaseball, you actually don't need to read a book to understand what's going on here. You can jump right in and start having fun. Alongside of that, Blaseball started off in this. We didn't have like a tutorial or anything. You kind of had to jump in and figure it out, and there's some joy to for the first fans to like come in and like find this weird, interesting thing and ask other people how it was working. But at some point, that has its limits, and when they're trying to reach more and more people, you can't expect everyone to take the time to really engage with it when it has all these rough edges. We've smoothed a lot of that out, made it easier for first time players to come into. Um, but yeah, at the same time, like we also know that this is not the very first season of Ball where we are all banding together to open the forbidden book without any idea what this experience is going to be. People have an idea of what Ball is now, so that means that the styles of story that we tell are different, and the way that we surprise our players has to change with their expectations.
I think that's interesting because I can relate to that certainly in terms of different sports you call. There are some diehard fans of gymnastics, but there are also fans that are tuning in because it's an Olympic year, or they know that,
Hmm.
Suni Lee, the reigning all around gold medalist in the Olympics, is going to be competing for Auburn. So how do you draw that line, right? Of not dumbing it down so much for the expert fan or the one that's been involved with it the entire time that, that they could be, so to speak, and then the person that's tuning in for the first time.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Um, you know, we we're not just adding uh, features that make it simpler. We also are improving the core game experience too. So for long time fans, they're going to come back to a dramatically improved baseball simulation. I won't go too deep into what that means, but we spent time to completely rebuild the simulation that powers baseball to make it more interesting and to create more, better, more interesting game outcomes without us having to, it's fun to constantly change the rules, but that can't be the crutch. Like we have to actually have like a really cool, fun game to watch under the surface of all of that. So you're going to see some really big improvements there too. I think giving fans ways to work with each other in a more natural way will help a lot as well, because that removes some of the friction, of just like joining communities and things like that in baseball. And then we also the game has a very different style of storytelling this time around that I
Hmm.
think is going to surprise all fans,
Looking
new
forward
and
to it.
returning. Yeah, yeah.
That's really cool, and I think it goes back to the point, that you talked about at the very beginning about what emotion do you want someone to feel while they're playing it. The interesting thing to me is that it's almost like everybody is feeling that emotion together, whatever that is,
Hmm.
right? It's whatever they want. It's not like if you're going in and playing Goldeneye and the emotion you feel is just scared to death that someone's going to come out from around the corner and shoot you. It's kind of like everybody banding together, whether or not a team is losing or winning or anything in between.
Yeah, it's that. that collective emotional outpouring that you get from sports. And I think there's something so incredibly powerful about that. And it's not something that games usually give you. You know, you're usually in a game, you're playing and experiencing a story by yourself. Or, you know, you are competing with 20 or so other players. But the idea of like all experiencing the repercussions of your choices together at the same time, that is very new and it's very powerful. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of our fans have latched onto.
All right, so we've talked a lot about your newest venture. Of course, we know you're the game band's creative director, but you're also the CEO, and obviously that has its own responsibilities. It's a completely separate undertaking. What has it been like for you? How have you learned how to run a company?
Yeah, I will say that I'm still learning. You know, every day is a new set of challenges. And when you go out to make a video game, like because it's a collective art form, you sort of have to also figure out if you want to start a new game, you're likely also going to be thinking about how am I going to start a company too. Um,
True.
and you know, with the game bands, like we have had a very unusual history, and I think a lot of probably the biggest takeaway is to not never get too attached to one long-term vision because this industry moves fast and it changes quickly and you have to be ready to adapt. For the first several years of the game band, we were a publisher-funded company, meaning you know we were paid to develop a game that was going to be released as a subscription service, and then later for on a more traditional digital storefronts. Um, Now we are a venture-backed studio, and that has a different set of expectations, and it made more sense for the style of game that we are now making because this is not a game that is something that we can easily sell for $20. We don't want to sell it for $20. We want it to be free, and we want it to grow, and we want it to change with the company, and to be able to build on top of that too. So the way that you fundraise changes, and the way that you hire changes, because we're now looking for a different set of talent than we were looking for when we were building games like Where Cards Fall. But I think the thing that stays the same is you know we've spent a lot of time working on our studio culture, on our values, and making games that are really unique and joyful and can bring a lot of different types of people into the fold. And there's a nice through line between all of the different changes that we've had at the company there. And I think that's been a huge advantage for us as we hire people from all different types of industries, but they come into a studio culture that is pretty well defined and works together really well and values the employees. And you know we fight against a lot of the things that you see in the games industry that don't work so well at like larger companies and such. Yeah.
You talked about hiring different types of people based on publisher based or venture based. What are those types of different people that you're looking for or that you've already hired?
Yeah, I should say, let me clarify that a little bit because it's not so much that the funding model changes the types of people, it's more
Hmm.
that we changed our funding model because we changed the type of company that we are and the types of games that we're making. And the types of games that we're making now demand a different set of talent. So, where cards fall was a single player 3D game made in Unity, which is one of the most popular game engines out there. So we were hiring a lot of people that had proficiency in that tool set. But Blaseball was launched in web browsers and it was built on web and app frameworks. So that meant that we were not even using the tools that most games are made in. We were doing something very different. And when we go and hire talent now, we're looking for people with an expertise in those frameworks, both like from a technical standpoint, but then also like designers that are used to designing great websites and apps and things like that. Which means that we like to look to the tech industry, and we bring in a lot of people that haven't actually worked on games before, but have always wanted to and have a passion for this stuff, um, but they never had the matching skill set. Here they do, so it's an advantage for us, you know, with hiring, and it also lets us widen the perspectives of the company, which is really important. That was also true of Where Cards Fall. Even though we were making a game in a more traditional, you know, framework, we hired a lot of people from like visual effects, from commercials, from film production to really try to reach an audience that was beyond the typical audience for video games.
Right, right. That makes sense. And certainly, graphically it's a beautiful game, so I'm sure that that brings some people in, and I would imagine that made an impact, for sure. Are you looking at, I mean, there's obviously going to be a time after Blaseball, or at least something that comes after Blaseball. Maybe Blaseball still exists, but something else might come along. Will it be similar? Are you guys done with the traditional, user based experience, or are you trying to develop something else like in the Blaseball ilk as well?
Yeah, we're certainly building on top of what we've learned from with Blaseball. Even if you look at the shape of the team, like because we've hired so many people with this particular set of expertise, we don't want to have to be constantly shifting the team. We want to build on our success and all the things that we've learned. But we also want to be able to reinvent and to surprise. Like that has always been one of the core philosophies of the studio is to not just repeat ourselves and to do things that push boundaries and change things. Um, I've always been really drawn to platforms that are not traditional game platforms because I've always felt like there's so many more people that could fall in love with games and would if they were only in places that they would access. Like you know, my mom doesn't know what Steam is, and a lot of other game companies around our size like are squarely focused on Steam, and like it's a great platform. There's a lot of great games on it, but it's kind of preaching to the choir, and we're interested in going beyond that. So that means that we want to continue to invest in the web and into mobile, and it doesn't that doesn't break or stop us from doing more traditional game platforms, but it's not going to be our focus. We're going to focus on places where we feel like have a broader audience with different types of people that wouldn't normally feel welcome in games.
And then the new investment that you got focuses on that, right? Being able to do mobile and to make these type of games. It's not easy to go to someone and say, "Hey, I need millions of dollars to pursue this passion and to pursue this project." So take me a little bit inside your mind, your creativity in coming up with a pitch that you thought might win someone over.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think what we made here with Blaseball is a very new type of live entertainment. And I think there's something for investors that's always really exciting about investing in a first mover and investing in a company that is doing things very differently from any other type. Um, we are saying, hey, like this is a new form of entertainment. This isn't just a normal video game. This is a giant mass collaborative story. And Blaseball was our first attempt at this. We created a very new type of live entertainment with Blaseball. It's this mass collaborative storytelling experience that it's brand new, and I think there's always something really exciting about ideas that are brand new. Um, Placeball is a success for us. We think that we have plenty of other ideas that play with this type of experience that could also be successful, um, and a way to bring a lot more people into the fold. Um, yeah, like sometimes as investors might want to look for something that feels like a safe bet, like it's playing off of something that is known and obvious. Sometimes they might want to take a big swing. I think for us, we are always going to be the big swing. Like what we are doing does not have much precedent before. The monetization for it is not proven. Our growth trajectory is not proven. However, if we succeed, then we have carved out a brand new space, and we are going to be the leader in it. And I think there's something really alluring about that. We've already shown that we can make great games. We've shown that we can build community. We've shown that we value our players first and foremost above all else. This is not like a monetization scheme disguised as a game. This is a video game first and foremost that a lot of people really love. And that's a great thing to build off of.
I think the biggest question, though, that is probably coming to everybody's mind is, it's amazing. It's a great game. People love it. At the end of the day, how do you make money from it?
Yeah, so our next version of Voice Ball is going to have some things for people to buy for really for the first time, at least integrated into the game. Uh, we think we've. I'm not going to talk too specifically about it, but
Sure.
we've got something that I think people are going to really like. That is well within the spirit of what we've seen people value around the game.
Um, we had a Patreon at one point where people were spending money to really just support us. We saw fans selling all sorts of merchandise around the game. These are all avenues that are compelling and interesting. We don't want to step on any toes for what the fans are already doing. We want to do something that is more specific to what we can bring to the table, and hopefully delight them and improve their play experience in some ways. We're not going to ask them to spend money on anything that they need to play the game. The game's going to stay free. It's more of, here's a way to have a little bonus or something that you can help remember your experience playing the game.
I think that's cool. The fact that you're not shutting people out because of money is a big thing. And honestly, it always it always amazes me when you ask someone not to donate money or to give you money, but when you make something available, you think nobody wants this. Nobody's going to, if they're passionate about it, like they're going to say, okay, this is something I really care about. And maybe I'll spend a few bucks on it. And I'm sure you guys are going to see that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We saw it before in our early days, and we really had nothing to offer. We just put up the Patreon and said, "Hey, we could use your help," and we were overwhelmed by the response that we got to that. It was really great at the beginning, especially when we were a small group of people. For a larger group of people, we're going to need to to find a way to do more than that. But every step of the way, we are making sure that whatever we introduce is ethical and joyful and something that people will be happy to spend money on and not look back at with any feeling of regret.
That's great. It really is. And you could tell the values of the company are so important to you and certainly to the types of people that are playing your games. I think that they feed off of that as well. Let's end on this note. Let's kind of bring it out a little bit, broad picture, bring out the scope. What is some advice that you have to just any creative out there? It doesn't have to be video game designer, anybody that wants to create something. What would you say?
Ooh, let's see. Um, I think that oftentimes when I talk to like younger creatives or people trying to kind of get their start, I see a lot of fear. A lot of like, I don't know if this idea is going to work, or I don't know if this is practical or so. And my my advice is to create an environment where you feel free to explore and feel free to test and to try things without so much of a fear of failure. Uh, because a lot of your ideas aren't going to work, but if you don't try them, you're never going to find the one that nobody has thought of before that really could. I think that a lot of our big successes, both as a company and then even before, as students and such, came from having the space to feel like we're going to throw this out there, we're going to try something. If it hits, amazing. If it doesn't, on to the next thing. Um, and that I would really try to create that environment for yourself, and then also bring on collaborators early. I think like if you can have a place where you can run your work by friends and workshop things with them together, you'll be more you'll find ideas that you never would have had, because that's what happens when you start sharing your work with other people, and you might end up with something that you didn't expect in a really good way.
Well, you certainly did, Sam. Thank you so much for the time. This was so enlightening.
Thanks,
and
Alex.
So much fun. Great to learn about Blaseball and more about the game band, and hope everybody checks it out.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.